ここなんですよ。ここまでやったんですよ、先週。
うん。
覚えてる？ Okay, let's going to start. Just, we don't have so much time, but, about 40 minutes remaining. So, let me try to start from that 11 minutes of, Benazir Bhutto.
Okay. Sometimes in exile. But in August 1988, General Zia, the military ruler, died in a still unexplained aeroplane crash.
Okay, this one is 1988 military regime. All members crashed in the airplane. It's 1988. So then she will come the opportunity to going to be the prime minister. Okay, everybody crashed. So this military is cool and they got the position, but actually they dead.
And his death paved the way for the holding of elections in Pakistan. The military backed the election of a new President Ghulam Isaq Khan. And although many of our supporters
at that time still she cannot be get position yet.
Disenfranchised, although my party was denied the right to an election symbol, so important in a country with widespread illiteracy, I led the Pakistan People's Party to a convincing victory against the forces of fundamentalism, against the forces of a well-entrenched establishment, and against the forces which had organized dictatorship for more than a decade. On December 2nd, 1988, I became Prime Minister of Pakistan, the first woman ever to lead a Muslim country in democratic times. It was not just a personal victory for me, and I do not see it as just a victory for my country. It was the triumph of an idea, the idea of an enlightened Islam where men and women are equal. As soon as we formed the government, we put into practice what we had preached for so many years. We immediately freed the press, freed political prisoners, and we planted the seeds of democracy, nurturing, cultivating, feeding, at first fragile institutions, which we hoped would one day develop into a strong, capable, and just political system. But those 20 months were not easy for my government or for my people. The entrenched forces of dictatorship would not let go. They were not willing to leave the privilege and power which they had enjoyed, and they used their resources to start a massive campaign.
Okay, she elected at 1988, but actually she accused of corruption. But actually it is not corrupted, but she accused corruption and succeeded to another prime minister. And another prime minister also is doubt for the corruption. This country, like her presentation is very good, but actually this kind of situation will continue until now. Okay? Last week I explained that before Pakistan, they're talking about the Pakistan is supporting for Taliban, and this actually still country itself is not stable, and also terrorist activity is still there, and many people are still dying. And the kind of situation is still not, but her presentation is very good.
Of disinformation. And as a woman, I faced an additional burden from those in my society who believe that a woman's place is behind closed doors. I remember when I first became Prime Minister, pamphlets were distributed by a fundamentalist party in which one of the fundamentalists said that he had dreamt he saw the Prophet with tears of blood running down his face. And he asked the Prophet, "Oh my Prophet, why are you weeping tears of blood?" And the Prophet replied, "These tears will not stop till that woman goes." So such were the ways that the fundamentalists dreamed of in trying to destabilize and depose my government, forgetting that the Holy Book itself had pointed to the rule of Queen Sheba and described it as a land of plenty. I am proud to say that my government brought an economy in ruins to life. We introduced privatization, not denationalization, not selling public sector enterprises to a handful of individuals, but trying to broaden the scope of shareholding in the country by allowing professionals and middle classes to buy shares instead of spending the money on consumer items. We made difficult decisions to reduce the domestic debt and non-developmental expenditure. We cut non-developmental expenditure by 3 billion rupees and refunneled this money into a grassroots anti-poverty program. We didn't do what was popular. We did what was necessary, and Pakistan prospered. The World Bank and the IMF lauded our efforts, and the United States Ambassador to Pakistan called my government a role model for third world countries. We cut unemployment by half and reduced inflation to 5.6%. And simultaneously, we addressed the long neglected social needs of our people by increasing education expenditure by 70%, health expenditure by 40%, by drawing up the blueprint for an ambitious population control program, and earmarking funds for women's development. It wasn't easy when we had to pay.
Actually, her presentation might be 2000, year 2000. And she was assassinated 2007, and second term of Prime Minister. And this is her presentation, first term of Prime Minister. And what she is talking is very good government policy she tried to develop. Very good. It's unbelievable at 15 years ago. But she just actually assassinated 2007 by I forget what they said in English. What is it? What did you say? Jibakter, what did you say? Bombing sound. I forget that. But anyway, at that time, okay, she made it.
Military. It wasn't easy when we had an IMF program, and so to fund these programs, we involved ourselves in the largest ever resource mobilization that Pakistan has known. 1.4% of GDP as opposed to 1% of GDP. And within the political constraints under which we labored, my government did everything possible for the well-being of the women of Pakistan. If I may give you two small examples, we lifted a 10-year ban on women taking part in international sports. And after a decade, for the first time, Pakistani women could compete with their sisters in international competitions. We opened a women's development bank to give loans to working women who wanted to open boutiques or salons or export garments. It was a bank run by women for women, but we did allow men to keep their money in it if they so wished. But this was only a beginning. Elected for a 5-year term, we had the hopes and dreams of transforming our nation, but we were unable to complete this task. Just 4 days after Iraq went into Kuwait, the forces of fundamentalism moved in Islamabad, and in a military-backed coup with constitutional window dressing, so similar to last month's fraud in Moscow, my government was sacked and a state of emergency declared. My political opponents were taken into the new government, becoming the Pakistani equivalent of Moscow's Committee of 8. But unlike the world's reaction to the attempt against President Gorbachev, a distracted world stood silently by while democracy was dismembered in Pakistan and fabricated charges of abuse of power were brought against my government ministers, my party colleagues, and even my family members. I was threatened with dire consequences if I contested the elections. And this was a particularly difficult time for me because in the past, as leader of the opposition, fighting General Zia, I did not have 2 small children. And at this particular time, I was caught between my obligations as a mother, between my obligations to the lawyers who were fighting the legal cases against my husband and myself, and of course, obligations to the people of Pakistan because we were involved in a political campaign and I had to address campaign meetings. But I knew one thing, that my commitment to the people of Pakistan came first. And in the months of August, September and October, I spurned all offers by the Pakistani government to go into exile, although I was threatened that if I stayed on, I would be disqualified and my husband would be sentenced. I was encouraged by the people of Pakistan who supported us and came to every rally in large numbers. Every poll, every analysis predicted that the Pakistan People's Party would win the elections. But as I feared and publicly stated.
So at that time, her husband was sentenced, which means her husband put into the jail. And she is waiting for next election for candidate as a prime minister. Also, she forced her to get in the jail, her too. I don't know, I forget that what timing, after this address or before address. Also, she put in jail for several years before.
The forces that organized the dismissal of my government in August 1990 were not prepared to see me re-elected in October 1990. In those elections, we bore sad witness to a massive electoral fraud in Pakistan, with fictional votes being added to government-sponsored candidates. This is not just my claim. The most conservative report published by the NDI admits that 15% rigging took place. The French report goes much further in enumerating massive rigging which took place. And as time has passed, the former caretaker Prime Minister has admitted that rigging took place, but he was unable to stop it. The caretaker Minister of Water and Power has admitted that rigging took place and he was unable to stop it. And so have 2 former coalition party members. On August 4th, 1991, Mr. Naveed Malik, who is here with us coincidentally today and was an advisor to Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, held a press conference in which he said that on the eve of the elections in Pakistan, a meeting took place between the security agencies and the government, where it was decided that the Pakistan People's Party number of seats would be kept to 45. The Minister of Interior also said publicly that the PPP would not win more than 45. And he said this was done by adding 20,000 votes to each government candidate through electoral cells that had been set up in the 4 provinces. This was not the first indication of electoral cells. The NDI team had also noted the functioning of an electoral cell in Balochistan. 20,000 votes per government candidate. That amounts to 7 million votes. I'm sure those kind of numbers would have kept a Democrat in office for the last 3 terms and made sure that Mrs. Thatcher was not re-elected in England. There is a lesson for all of us in this, not just for the people of Pakistan, but for all of us in transitional democracies. Because democracy is not just balloons and buntings. Democracy is not just about buttons. Democracy is about the sanctity of the ballot. And when the sanctity of the ballot is destroyed, democracy is eroded. And that is why we must all share our experiences as parliamentarians and recognize that democracy can be fragile, and fragile democracies need support. We are aware that Mr.
So what she said, 20,000 vote for several provinces. This is actually rigged voting. So at that time maybe she was defeated, right? And then next election she got the win. So she is talking about this 4 defeated election that was rigged.
Mrs. Aquino's 5-year experiment with democracy in the Philippines has faced 5 attempts, including one which needed to be put down with the armed intervention of the United States. In Argentina, there have been more than half a dozen military rebellions, and in Peru, narcotics and terrorism threaten a 2-decade experiment in democracy. I remember when I was alone in prison, I was so heartened to hear that Senator Pell in the United States had linked United States assistance to Pakistan to the restoration of full civil liberties and representative government. The US and other countries today are making it clear that aid to Eastern Europe will be predicated on freedom and economic liberalism.
So why he is making an address? This is he address in Washington, I believe. So why she's make address in the United States? She want to get support from US, like because she was jailed at that time. US will support her to release sort of things. He tried to make an effort to persuade American politicians.
These efforts at informal ad hoc networking for democracy need to be strengthened. Democratic nations, and here the global parliamentarians can play a role, need to forge a consensus against the most powerful idea in the world today, the right of a people to freely choose their government. And that is why I believe that there should be an association of democratic nations which can support democracies in countries where there is no democracy, share experiences with new democracies, and set up 2 important components. One I would call the human rights component, and the second I would call the vote counting component. Mrs. Aquino would never have won the elections if NAMFREL had not been there as an independent vote counting machinery, because the government declared that President Marcos had won the elections. Perhaps I would be Prime Minister today if NAMFREL had been counting the votes in Pakistan. Thus, the Association of Democratic Nations needs to sponsor a vote counting machinery as an independent verification of a government vote count. The second aspect on which I give importance is the question of human rights, because any government...
Great public dissatisfaction.
And there are forces in Pakistan that would have been delighted with a renewal of the Cold War, which they could have played off to their own advantage. The Association of Democratic Nations could help change the calculus for all potential coup plotters by enabling them to know that they would face international outrage and international disgrace. Ultimately, the door could be kept open even for economic sanctions. And I believe that what is at stake here is not just international morality, but also international peace and stability. There's a simple fact, although it's much overlooked, and that fact is that democracies do not start wars with democracies. At least I do not know of an example in modern history of one democratic nation going to war with another democratic nation. Thus, democracy is the only guarantor of international peace and stability. An association of democratic nations could promote the idea that foreign aid and economic investment be channeled to and restricted to only real democracies. There is nothing wrong in rewarding an idea in which the donors believe. A frontal assault on basic human rights is taking place as we speak today against the people of my country, Pakistan, where thousands committed to democracy have been arrested from streets, have been kidnapped, tortured, and even murdered. I mentioned earlier to our hosts that in Pakistan, parliamentarians belonging to the opposition, I am leader of the opposition, have been kidnapped. The first time the kidnapping took place was in November, second time in December 1990, then in February 1991, and now again on August 4th, a member of the minorities belonging to our government disappeared for a whole month till September 5th. His family wrote telegrams to the President and the Prime Minister. In the newspapers, articles appeared that the parliamentarian has disappeared and his family have alleged that he has been kidnapped. The party has alleged he has been kidnapped. But not a word of concern from the President or the Prime Minister. Not a word of concern from the Speaker. Ultimately, the parliamentarian appeared and defected to the other side. The main accused in a case against my husband is a parliamentarian. He held out for 6 months. But after 6 months, when he wanted to be free of jail, the Chief Minister of the province went to him and offered him his freedom if he defected. The television cameras were brought into the prison.
Okay, defected is negated.
To televise his defection. Members of parliament have been called terrorists unless they defect. One member of parliament was vacationing in the hills when a dead body was recovered from his living room. It had been planted there by the police. And when a Washington Post stringer wrote stories about how the police are fabricating cases, he received 17 stab wounds. And that is not the only case of intimidation of a journalist who has dared to write police and the state is doing. Unfortunately, dictatorships always seek to garb their crushing of political opponents in the cloak
I don't understand garb means.
Of legality. And that is why it is so necessary to have an independent human rights commission which can look into cases brought against political opponents to see whether those political opponents did in fact commit a crime and are seeking refuge under political status, or whether the state is committing a crime against those political opponents. And that is why an association of democratic nations should have a human rights component. Because of the silence of the world, Even today, my husband and colleagues are in prison cells and they have very little hope of getting free without the executive branch wanting them to be free, because the executive branch has set up special courts. I'm pleased to say that Canadian Observer Team...
I think still her husband is in jail, right?
The French Observer Team and indeed the English Observer Team have all come and examined the special courts and said they do not provide a fair trial to the defendants. I'll give you an example. My former Minister of Law was disqualified by a special court. The special court wrote in its judgment that although the prosecution has failed to prove its case, because the onus is on the defendant, we find him guilty. Now, because it's a contempt of law in which judgments cannot be discussed, the press cannot write about this judgment. Legal opinion cannot discuss this judgment. Another special court judge in Karachi, sentencing 8 boys to death, wrote, because President Bush says that convictions do not take place in Pakistan and there is lawlessness, therefore I convict these 8. President Bush doesn't even know about the special court trial taking place in Pakistan. But again, because of the contempt of law proceedings, nobody can examine these judgments, and that is why my party has suggested a reform of the judicial system and said before a judge is confirmed, he should appear before the Parliament's committee and all his judgments should be scrutinized. We also intend to repeal this contempt of court law once we come into government. I do believe that democracy in the New World Order demands that basic tenets of freedom and human rights be protected whenever and wherever they are threatened. We cannot pick on one coup and not pick on another. We cannot afford to choose one massacre and not choose another. We cannot afford to make a distinction between one fraudulent election and another. People who believe in democracy cannot condemn a coup in Moscow and remain silent when one takes place in Islamabad. Selective morality is immoral. People who believe in human rights cannot condemn 3 deaths in Moscow and remain silent when hundreds die in Kashmir. Selective morality.
She said the coup in Moscow is, at that time, 2001 or 2, USSR is breaking into Russia at the era of Gorbachev. At that point, she said coup in Moscow
is immoral. People who believe that human rights should not be violated cannot remain silent when human rights are violated in the Middle East. For selective morality is immoral. The New World Order and the freedom and the victory of freedom against totalitarianism has put the onus on the forces of freedom not to pick and choose, but to universally and unquestionably and immediately speak out when democracy and human rights are being violated. That, I believe, is the moral imperative of the New World Order.
So, just watching this video, I just recognized Prime Minister or former Prime Minister. They are going to make a speech in the States, in Washington. Washington is mainly political issue, and politicians get together to listen to her, and her presentation will going to spread all over the world, especially for Pakistan. And sort of things very important for those people, right? So I watching this video, I recognize none of the Japanese politicians make kind of presentation like, okay, Abe, Prime Minister Abe at the Parliament, he did made a presentation before, but that's sort of, she going to make an address in that kind of meeting, whatever. And Japanese Diet members, Parliament members, they don't make a presentation to appeal their voice, their opinion. I think this sort of thing is very important to influence many American politicians, like, for example, Comfort Woman, or, for example, Nazi Massacre, sort of things. Those people need to make a presentation for those press and try to communicate with American people And those information, their reaction of American politicians will going to spread all over the world, including Europe and any other area, Asia Pacific. This is very important, I recognize, right?
Despite my frustration, and yes, even anger, over the coup against my government, the blatantly fraudulent elections, the tragic setback to democracy, I am determined to continue to struggle for our common cause of freedom. Despite the pain I feel.
So she is talking about the freedom, talking about democracy. Actually, Pakistan, they do not exist democracy or do not exist freedom. That's the reason she is talking about. She emphasized for those issues, right?
Even as I speak to you today, that my husband is held for no other crime than being married to me, I believe it is important not to give up. I remember my father's last letter to me, written from the...
Her father was also executed, not assassinated, executed.
Death cell, in which he quoted the words of Robert F. Kennedy. And he said, "Every generation has its central concern whether to end war, erase racial injustice, or improve the working conditions of man." Today's young people appear to have chosen for their concern the dignity of the individual human being. They demand a government that speaks directly and honestly to its citizens. And then my father added, "The possibilities are too great, the stakes too high, to bequeath to the coming generation only the prophetic lament of Tennyson." Ah, lament of Tennyson. Ah, what shall I be at 50 if I find the world so bitter at 25? I am guided by those words, and that is why I was so pleased to have this opportunity to speak with the global parliamentarians. I want you to know that I was due to go to Puerto Rico for a well-earned holiday, but I decided to come here and be with all of you and to speak to you as one parliamentarian to another about our common concerns for freedom and the common efforts that we should be making for its preservation. I shall now be very happy to answer some questions for you, and the number of questions will depend as to how much time Congressman Green can give us.
So, Takashi, how do you think her presentation?
But finally, so after she was killed, assassinated.
Maybe 5 or 6 years later. And before, after this her address, her husband came from jail, and she took second time as a prime minister after her address for this presentation. At that time, she is not prime minister at that time. Okay, and first term is she is accused of corruption and she lost position, and then another person got the prime minister, and then she'll go get it again. And all the way around, every prime minister accused of corruption. But this is not true. But this is, I think, also she understands democracy very well, right? She said some lot of message about the democracy and also freedom, and she understands very well, and voting and rigged by many people, rigging voting in Pakistan. So she understands what is democracy very well. And do you remember several weeks ago, we going to, I did for Hong Kong some debate for the China is better or Western is better for their democracy or not. The kind of discussion is, and the Chinese side couple of, presenters, they didn't know anything about democracy. So that's the reason I just emphasize on what is democracy. We need to study the key element of democracy, right? So she understands democracy. What is it? Especially in front of this book, I just always writing down here. You can see, have a look. Every book I just put in this one. Okay, just a fair election and civic people involving to the people and by the people for the people. And also human rights, she just emphasized the human rights, right? And this is rule by law. Not rule of law, rule by law. Rule of law is like China, like Xi Jinping, just the central government is rule, is law itself. No, this should be separated, is independent, rule by law. And also freedom of press. And these 5 issues is very important to recognize what is democracy, right? She understands this one very well. And do you remember that Hong Kong what's the name of it? I like she's the first, politician. She is Anthony Chan. Yes, she is very good person to understand democracy, and very good to understand that also. Benazir Bhutto is also she understands democracy very well. So this is my I just pick up her message. Usually I don't pick this kind of former prime minister. She already assassinated dead people, but she is very good concept did she have. And Pakistan itself is still struggling now. And kind of her type of person, not into the political area. So still there that this country is struggling. And right?
That's oh shit. She was speaking out her philosophy, which is totally based on the democracy. And so the problem is speaking out that philosophy will become a risk at her life. So it's still too risky to speak out. You mind your life.
South Asia and the Middle East is very risky to speak out for kind of what is democracy. And this is father. And current this is history of Pakistan politics is after World War II until now. And Zardari is current, and she's for this position. Right? And Zardari, this is a person, Hussein, current president. Nobody knows, right?
No.
He's not famous. I just looking for his pictures. I tried to make a lot of effort, and he's not famous. But this is Hussein is. Mamnoon Hussain is the president of Pakistan now. But, he's not famous. But I just put it in the picture.
And the question is if these steps are necessary to get the ideal political democratic situation of Venezuela. Bhutto and his father, even risking at their lives.
But the interesting thing is, even though, this is actually not only Pakistan, many other countries is they have succeeding their offspring, this is children and daughters going to take position instead of father, mother. And so even still that, India is the same, but very difficult to sustain those people taking position in this country. And this is because of election and rigging, but also rigging means they are manipulating voting machine, and also they try to, America is the most famous, they try to force them, black people force them not voting, sort of things is prevailing in the States. And also South Asia is the same. And but also older people, they don't know who to vote. As you know, the Tokyo municipal election, but also this coming lower parliament election, it's the same. Older people, they don't know who to vote, right? So that's the reason why it's very difficult to how to control their government, who's going to lead the government. So this means Japan is the best. I believe Japan is so far. Okay, I'm analyzing North Asia and Southeast Asia, South Asia and Middle East, and now I'm doing Africa. But the best democratic best country in the world is so far. Japan is best, one of the best countries in the world. But also we have Australia is also good. On Saturday we are doing, right? So this is current. So in Pakistan we need to study. Bhutto made a good presentation. She's good to govern their country, but she cannot sustain her position. Even she is not assassinated, but she cannot sustain her position in the government because of the lots of opposition parties and other people. They don't know who's the best to lead their government. This is a problem, and many people talking about that is we try to give them education, training for other people. This is impossible to doing that. It's very difficult how to sustain democracy. This means Japan is very good situation, just keeping fairly good, like our current Abe Prime Minister. He is doing very well, even if he just a lot of wrongdoing, but still he is one of the best in the world to leading a country. So this is my recent my feeling for the democracy. The Pakistan is a good example, and I'm going to continue next week for the Wednesday night and to try to Pakistan. Pakistan, they have terrorism. They have a lot of terrorism. They I'm going to show you, and also bribes, corruption, and they just fund, but finally money is missing. And also,
how do you feel? How do you see the latest situation in Myanmar that's triggered by the Rohingya?
By the way, you went to Myanmar recently, right?
Yeah, but I didn't feel that some strange situation, but it will be going to come up. I saw the article that unnno-san uploaded in the Facebook that some
yesterday
militant group was organized, backed up by the Western, the neighbors to West neighbors of the Myanmar. The Rohingya, it's going to be more extreme. So we're just making the situation in Myanmar more complicated.
Okay, I tell you the result is a very similar situation happened for Bhutan 1980s. At that time, Bhutan is a 600,000 population current now, But beforehand, they were almost 1 million. And 300, more than 300,000 Nepal Bhutanese, okay? And they kicked out from that country. So they moved into Nepal, and they don't get Nepal nationality. Still refugees staying there, right? And the same situation that happened in Myanmar. And my friend is living there for 2 years as JICA. And she told me, Aung San Suu Kyi, she's not wrong. But she's good about, she's belonging to their people of Myanmar. People Myanmar is very strong Buddhist. So she cannot against them if she want to sustain her position. And ordinary people hate Rohingya. So hate Rohingya. So it means finally 1 million Rohingya should be kicked out from their country. This is very similar to Bhutan. Okay, Rohingya people is small people and mixing their country. If so, no problem. But actually they are occupy some area, right? I forget the territory, the name, but so that reason they just against Rohingya. So Aung San Suu Kyi cannot support those Rohingya. If she is going to support Rohingya, she cannot sustain her position in Myanmar. Okay, so this is, I think, what she is talking. She cannot say anything for the supporting Rohingya. But at the human rights standpoint of position, she should need to protect Rohingya. But actually she didn't. It means she cannot sustain her position. This is, I think, you said complicated or sophisticated. And if she going to speak out, protect Rohingya, he just against military. He just against ordinary people, and she can sustain position in her country. But human rights at the standpoint of democracy, she need to protect Rohingya.
Yeah, so otherwise she will make another enemy.
But
Rohingya will be militant.
But she should say what is the truth, what is honest, But she didn't speak as honest, okay? She just tried to protect her position, his party or his group in that country. This is not right. This is not true. But she is trying to protect his political party and her position because he is just a patient for 20 years. But it's a son of a bitch, She should tell the truth. Even if he loses the position, she should speak out honestly how to protect Rohingya. This is the true answer. Even if she's going to lose the position because he patient for 20 years, right? But she tried to protect her position.
Yeah.
That is wrong.
So that's wrong.
Yeah.
What was wrong is being good for her supporter. Then
Yeah.
It's going. Yeah. It's likely for her to be spoiled.
Yeah.
By our opponent.
Yeah, but that is not true. Not true action. Okay, by the way, we're going to time. So